So first thing that we want to do, you guys, is let's take a look at our reference, okay? Reference is always extremely important in anything that you're working on. And that's why I gather the reference for you when I put it up here. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be using our imagination and our creativity, and we're going to make a rocket chair. So we've made a couple chairs already, and the reason why I gave you the chair assignment is to get you familiar with how to manipulate and modify the primitives inside Maya. Okay, now that that's been done, if I come up here and look at some of the chair reference or that are up here, that somebody actually built this. Okay, we have a wheel here that's like a rubber slick back wheel. We have a nitrous tank. There's a parachute in the back. There's a chair here in the front. What this is, here's the little engine exit. It's like a rocket exit with compressed air or steam or whatever that shoots that chair. There's probably nitrous in there, and it comes screaming out of an engine that's underneath here. Okay, here's some other rocket-based elements that these take chemicals that go inside these cans right here, and they spray out. So just looking at the reference right now, I have lots of really cool shapes that are cylinder shaped that come back to primitives. Okay, now the primitives that I could use to make some of these tanks and these shapes would be a sphere, because I can grab a sphere in half and I could stretch the vertices and I can make my tank. Okay, there's some other little detail, like look at some of this arm detail and see how it has holes in it. The reason why you'll notice detail like this with the holes in it is because it makes it lighter weight. So you have a piece of metal with chunks and little circular holes out of it, but at the same time, you'll see that a lot of times with aircraft wings and aircraft interiors. Okay, they just don't put the solid bar of metal, they take the holes out of it and it makes it extremely lightweight. Okay, now what I don't want you to do is get caught up into all this tiny detail right here on the rocket engine. Okay, that comes a little bit later. Stick with the big shapes. If you go in and start attacking this and you start modeling all these little intricate parts and pieces and parts and more, it's going to be extremely overwhelming to you. You're not going to be able to you're going to get caught up in the detail. And that's actually a phrase we use in illustration and in art all the time. Don't get caught in the detail. Don't get caught rendering like this. The first thing they teach you is to draw and look at the big picture, look at the light that's happening, focus on all the big elements, don't get locked up into all the small things. Okay? So there's plenty of great reference here for rocket parts. I mean, look at this engine. There's some curved shapes in here that might be a little bit more complicated, but take what you see here and simplify it with some other parts, okay? And then just build on top of it and see where you end up. This reference here is a laser. And the reason why I grabbed it is this, just because of the parts of it look like it could be similar to a rocket engine or some type of gas propulsion system, or something associated with that. Here's that laser being used in the Mojave Desert by NASA. Okay. So, and then there's our chair reference that we had. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to fly through some of this, but just feel free to sort of watch me and see what I'm doing. Okay. I'm going to start with a really base primitive here. Okay. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do a couple booleans and I'm going to come up with my general shape. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and create a large cube shape here. Whoa, not that large. Okay. And I'm going to get ready to do a boolean inside my object here. Now, one of my concerns right now, I'm going to create another sphere next to this. Okay. Oops. I'm going to make this sphere. One of my concerns is if I split this in half, the fact that I've done it before, see how I have these angled edges in here? I'm a little worried. I want there to be a nice round curve to my rocket engine. If I get that squared off polygon look, it might not look correct right now. And since we're really working with primitives, this isn't going to affect us too much. That's something I could address right now. So I'm going to go into the input selection here for this particular object. I'm going to come down and under height. If I adjust the height, look at what happens. It's just putting more subdivisions in the height, and that's not really the area that I want to affect. What I want to affect is a subdivision of the axis. I'm going to raise that to 30. Okay, and if I look at it from a top view, you can see how I have much less linear angles as compared to that original typology here. But when I'm working, I'm going to go ahead and do both. Okay, I'm actually going to drop this one down, or raise it back up to, let's say, 35, even a little bit more. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this giant cube here. I'm going to do a boolean, and I'm going to cut this shape in half. Okay. Uh-oh, I can always check underneath. I have that cube isn't quite going all the way past. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it underneath there. Okay? There we go. Oops. Wrong object there. So now I have my cube shape. It's sitting right there. I'm going to drop my cube shape. And I want to drop it down so it hits about the halfway line mark. So what I could do is I could go into a see-through view, but then it gets a little confusing with the grid right there to see exactly where it's hitting. So what a good idea for me would be is instead of moving the cube, if I grab the sphere and get it up and find that halfway line mark right there, I can drop it down and I can cut it exactly just right above that halfway line mark right there. I'm now going to take that cube, I'm going to duplicate that and move that over to the same exact other sphere right here. And if you look, it's hitting at the exact same spot because I happen to create these right next to each other. Okay, so touch this one, touch this guy right here. I'm going to come down to under Mesh, Booleans and Difference. Okay, and then right there I now have this new piece. I center my pivot. Okay, do the same thing here. Okay, and Mesh, Boolean and Difference. All right, center my pivot. Okay, so now looking at this, you can see that difference about how much smoother this one is as compared to this piece of geometry, right? So what I can do now is I could jump inside my rocket piece here. I want to make the interior shell of that rocket engine, right? So what I'm going to do is, and what happened was since I did the Boolean, if I look underneath my modeled piece here, you'll see I have a piece of flat geometry right there. So what I could do to save myself some time in here is I can just duplicate that piece, drop it down a little bit, and it's going to do a Boolean inside that piece right there, and it'll create my little rocket engine piece, right? However, though, if I look at this from a see-through view, okay, it gets a little pinched here because all I've done is really drop the same shape inside itself and bring it back down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this interior one down a little bit and maybe even just move it up a teeny bit like this. Okay, I want there to, whenever I model things, I like there to be thickness, especially on something that might be it's experiencing or handling a lot of force. So a rocket engine is going to be experiencing that force. If I come into my back of my rocket engine and I just grab that backwards face and I just delete it, I could do that as a rocket engine, but you see how when I look at it, it's paper thin? And if I did a really fast render of that object and looked at it, it's so paper thin it doesn't look right. Okay, it looks like it would just fall apart. So now by coming in here and taking this and this one, so that's the object I'm going to keep, the object that's going to affect it, Mesh, Boolean, Difference. And now look at my rocket engine base. Okay, it has some thickness to it, it looks cool, it's nice and rounded. And then what's cool is I could come in here with the scale tool and I could just stretch it like that, and it looks much more like that cone-shaped, that egg-shaped rocket engine that if I look back in my reference right here, okay, that I saw right in here. Okay, and if I want to make any smaller adjustments to that, I could come in here, I could use the scale tool, or what else could I use that I just showed you the other day? Soft select. Okay, the only problem is if you look now, if I go to select vertices in here, you need to make sure that you're also selecting vertices in the inside. Okay, because there's inside typology happening in there from the Boolean that I did. Okay, that makes sense, right? So if I did soft select, I wouldn't just be selecting the outer ring, which I could. Remember, I showed you how to do that. What I could do is I could come up here. Let's say I wanted just to adjust part of the outer ring right now. I could come up, go back to my shaded mode. I could go down to select and go to select edge loop or the ring tool. So if I select edge loop and double click on just one edge right there, okay, all right, and now look, only that edge is selected, and I can modify that or switch back to vertices, okay, and just those vertices are selected. So if I have that selected, again, I go back to soft select option, which is under the move tool. I double click this tool and it brings up the option box. And if I come down here and I click soft select right now, okay, and if I adjust my fall off radius, I can see how soft select is going to be affecting that particular object. So I could even scale it down to where it's affecting just that particular little section right there. And once I get it down to where I want it to affect, I could literally come in here and scale out or modify part of that. However, I'm only going to be able to scale it within a certain amount of distance inside itself. Why? Because I'm going to hit the inside. Actually, it's not doing it. It's affecting the whole piece, which is sort of cool. even though I only selected one side. It's actually affecting the inner piece as well, which is great. Thanks, Soft Select. Another great option of that, okay? And I could look at what that rocket would look like if it was completely smoothed off by pressing 3. But for me right now, I'm actually not going to do any of that. I'm going to take off Soft Select. I'd just like to remind you about that option. Now I'm just going to focus on the core engine right here, okay? So now that I have that core engine done, give me a second here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get rid of this object here. I'm going to start making some little components that I could use that might resemble components that would be used for like fuel ignition, pumping gas, stuff like that. And I'm going to show you how quick I can make them. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make what might be like a little mini carburetor. When I was a kid, I had a little motorcycle called by Honda, called the Mini 50. Okay, and the carburetor had these little slits of metal on it. And you'll notice that in electronics quite often, and you'll notice that with current engines that are air-cooled. What those slits do is those slits allow the heat to transfer to them, and then the air hits the slits in between the slits, and then it cools it down. So it's a great, inexpensive way to have an air-cooled object. And a lot of times in computers, you'll notice that there are transistors like this, and then somewhere in your computer you have a fan, and that fan operates, and it blows air through there, and it cools things down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this top, what I did is I duplicated that cube itself. I squashed it and I stretched it and I put it up on the top here. I'm now going to duplicate that, move it down one piece, and then hold Shift D. I'm going to make it my little transistor part. There it is. It's done. I'm going to select it. I'm going to group it and center the pivot. Now I've made one little cool little engine piece that could be used over there. So when I look back at my reference that I was looking at a couple minutes ago, what were some other elements that I saw on there? Another element was that simple sort of canister shape, right? To make my canister, I'm going to take a sphere like this. I'm going to go into vertices. I'm going to go into see-through mode. I'm going to line it up so it's completely lined up here, and I'm going to select half of the vertices from the midsection. I'm going to grab them and I'm going to raise them up. And now I've made my canister. Okay, which is pretty cool, right? Simple pieces here. Okay, next what I want to do is I want to show you how I can make a pipe. Okay, with a Taurus. I can make a pipe or what looks like a hose really quick, and then I could come back into that and I could modify that at any time or any position. Now one of the things that I'm doing here is that I'm making some core shapes that I'm going to be able to reuse and duplicate quickly that are going to aid me in modeling and coming up with some cool, interesting shapes. So right now I have just these two little core elements that I've made here. So let me go back in and make a couple more here. What was the shape I just said I was going to make again? The pipe, thank you. I was losing my mind. I was thinking about making a support system too. Okay, so there's my Taurus that I created. That's a little thick right now for a pipe for me, and there's some jagged edges on that. So I'm going to select that object, go into the input selection here. I'm going to come down into the radius, okay? I'm sorry, section radius. I'm going to scale this down and get a little bit more of a hose consistency. Now it's a little bit harder when I touch on it and do the middle mouse drag. I might need to actually come in here and enter a couple numbers like 4 if I want to make it a little bit thicker. And so what I'm going to do to save myself some time, I'm going to work on 2 of these at the same time. I'm going to make one over here that's going to be a little bit thinner, okay, and one's going to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to start with the thinner one here. I'm going to drop this down to about 2. Oops, my bad there. Let me just do it this way. I still like middle mouse clicking on it and getting it to about where I want it. Then I could come in and type in a couple of commands. So that's going to be about 2, and this hose here, if I look, was left at 4. That's just fine. But what I want to do is, again, when I look at it, I have that edged feel to it. I want to smooth that off a little bit. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is increase some of my subdivisions right here to about 30. Okay, and that starts to work a little bit better. I might even push that up to 35. Okay, come back to this object here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to push this up to 35 as well. Okay, now that that's done, to make my little hose line, what I'm going to do is I need to delete the other half of the Taurus here. So I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go to faces. I'm going to come in here, select this half of faces right here. Okay, and then hit delete. Okay, now you notice I missed a section right here, or I took too much. I just want to get this lower part right here. That way I can grab the vertices down from these guys, pull them straight down, and it'll look like a hose. Okay, so I'll do that in just a second. Let me go ahead and do the same thing to this one right here. I'm going to come in here to face. I'm going to select half of these faces right in here. Boom, that works. Get that little one I missed right there. I'm going to switch back to vertice now. So now this is how I create my little tube, is I grab this half of the vertices and I go to move tool and I stretch it across. Okay, now I've created what looks like a little tube here. And then to get these lined up, I'm going to select the end of these vertices right here with these vertices here, and I'm going to go to the scale tool and I'm going to scale them together and get them to become perfectly centered, okay, by selecting both ends. So now I'm going to come back down to this other pipe here as well. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move this pipe over here, okay. I'm going to switch to vertices on it, right click on it, go to vertices selection. I'm going to select this element right here. I'm going to go ahead and pull it over. When I'm finished, I'm going to select these vertices here. I'm going to come down here and scale them together so they meet right in the middle. That way if I line them up on an object, what am I? I'm plumb. They're nice, they're sitting on a 45, and I can use them in numerous positions. Next thing I'm going to do is, I notice a lot of times when I look at reference and I have hoses, there's always a base fitting plate. Okay? And so what I'm going to do really quick to make my base fit plate is I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to take a really simple cylinder. I'm going to I just created the thickness so it's close to the pipe here. I'm going to go ahead and rotate that over to 90 degrees. Okay, I'm going to enter that inside my channel box editor right here. I'm going to go to the move tool and I'm going to move and slide that up right to the base here. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and hit F. I'm going to zoom in, make sure I'm all lined up. I have my object centered in there. And for a base plate, that's still a little bit large. So I'm going to go in here and shrink it down a little bit, about so. Get that centered. Rotate, look at my object underneath, compare the height relationships from there to there. About right there feels pretty good for me. Now that I have that base plate there, I can go ahead and duplicate that and move it to the other side. But let's say I want to add a little bit more detail, just be a little bit more technical, right? Really quickly, how I can add a little bit more detail on that face plate, I could duplicate it, right? Scale it down a little bit, and then enlarge it a little bit. So now it looks like an outer ring on top of my little plate, right? And then I'm going to duplicate that and put that down here to the bottom and then scale that guy up a little bit like so. So now when I look at that, I'm like, that's pretty cool. I have a little bit more detailed faceplate here. Now I'm thinking about, you know what? I want to get that a little bit closer, round it in. What if I scale it in like this, right? Take this piece here, go to vertices, select the top of my vertices here, and scale them in like this. Now I have what looks like to be a really cool base plate that actually measures up to part of the diameter of the hose right there, doesn't that? And all I did was create one simple cylinder, duplicate it a couple times, modified the part. So what I'm going to do now is take this, okay, touch these three, and I'm going to group them together, center the pivot into one item, okay? And if I want to save myself time and hassle, I can go in here right now into my channel box. I'm sorry, I can't believe I called that the channel box. Into my outliner here, and I'm going to label that, and I'm going to call it base fitting, just to save myself some time. Because now I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to use it 4 times. I'm going to touch that pipe, and I'm going to call it small hose. Remember, if I do this in my modeling process, I save myself a lot of time. I'm going to come back to this guy. I'm going to label this large hose. Okay. So I'm now going to take that piece here. Uh-oh, what's happening? When I select it, it's not selecting the whole entire object. Why? Because I'm on independent selection mode. If I go back to the hierarchy selection right here and select that, come back and touch it, it'll select all of it because I already have a grouping. The other thing I could have done is came in here inside the outliner and I could have touched the grouping itself and it would have selected the object. Now I'm going to duplicate that pipe fitting. Okay, I'm going to slide it over and bring it right here to that end. I'm going to zoom in on it and make sure it's completely fit and looks squared off. Same distance there to about there, I'm good to go. Now I'm going to select this whole entire object, hit group again, and I'm going to label this as another small, as a grouping as a small pipe. There. So, oop, I accidentally hit the shift key. Small pipe. There we go. Hit enter. So, in the center. The one thing though that I was going to do is I wanted to grab that piece and enlarge it and put it here, and I just forgot it and I grouped it. So to save myself time, I'm going to duplicate that object, move it over right here. Okay, go down under Edit. I'm going to tell it to ungroup real quick. I'm going to delete the parts of my model that I don't need. Take this particular pipe right here. I'm going to raise it, rescale it up and raise the size of it, come it over and slip it right on the end of my other piece right there. Okay, it's pretty easy, right? I have that end done. You know, I'm going to scale it down a little bit more. It's a little large. There we go. That's cool like that. Okay. Now, I could even, if I wanted to make it look a little different than my other pipe fitting, I could even scale it a little bit like that. See what happens? Okay, or I could even inverse it like that. Okay, a bunch of little options. I could use the power of the scale tool to manipulate it really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that for right now. I've duplicated it. I'm going to move that one down to here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in on it by hitting F. Make sure it's squared up. I can scoot it over a little bit more. Touch the pipe. Touch the other fitting. What I could do is, even to save myself time in texturing or assigning materials, I could group both of them together right now, and I could call those fittings. Okay, not furrings, by the way. Furrings are probably something totally different. Okay, and I still misspelled it. There we go, fittings. Now I have the fittings. I have the pipe here. I'm going to select both of them, group them together, relabel that as my large pipe. Okay, now what I can do is dive into this, and I can start using these pieces to make, you know, I have some core simple pieces here that I can now use to make bases for an engine. So what I'm going to do is make maybe a couple more shapes that I could reuse quickly. Okay, one of the shapes that I liked from looking at my reference was this nice sort of arched shape that had the holes punched into it, right? So I want to look at that and look at, you know, hey, how can I measure that? How can I make that really fast? Okay, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little simple polycube right here. I'm going to come back to this shape and use it in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this down and save this for a second. Okay, I'm going to come into this shape right here, and I'm going to create a really basic cylinder. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take my cylinder, I'm going to move my cylinder into this shape, and I'm going to bullion and create a nice arch. So what I need to do is sort of get a nice stretched feel here, move this into proportion, and look down on it and sort of scale it up from the center. My goal here, so if I want to look at it exactly from a top view, to get back to that top view, I hit the space bar. Okay, I have my outliner up so it's not taking me to my 4 views. I can click the tab right here. If I click this tab, I can come back to my top view here, and this is a much easier view for me to look at now. Okay, I'm going to scale this guy up, and I'm going to try to get a nice arch in here that I could use. Okay, maybe I scale it back down, bring it over about, let's say about there. I'm going to go ahead and scale this down so it meets about halfway of the intersection inside the cylinder to halfway of the intersection. Does that make sense? So there's about halfway there. Okay, and I have a little bit of a ledge there that I want, then I have the rounded smooth part. So then here I'm just going to grab my vertices on my object here and move these manually and pull them in here. Oops. Yeah, for some reason I think it's on inverse selection. Let me go back to perspective mode real quick and see why it's doing that. Yep, so if I double click my move tool and I come back here, I think I might have accidentally placed it up. It's on a reflection setting. I'm going to unclick that by double clicking on the moves options there, close that window. There, I'm going to come back here, go to my top view now. I'm going to slide those over. But you'll notice I want to get about the same distance, okay, with these. I'm going to pull this up to about here. There's some jagged edges in there. Do you see that? I don't really have a nice smooth transition. So what I'm going to do is select that object right now, go into independent selection, go to inputs here, and I'm going to really punch up the subdivisions to about 40 because I want to have a nice smooth effect happening right in there, right? Heck, I could even go to 50 if I want, because I'm going to lose this object. I want to have a nice smooth transition in there. So now I'm going to select the object I want to keep, the object that's going to affect it. Okay, I can come back to my perspective view right here. Okay, I can go to mesh, booleans and difference, and now I have this really cool piece right here that I can use as a support and a platform piece to hold parts of my engine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come over and I'm going to punch a couple holes in it, just like I showed you in the reference piece, right? So to do that, I'm going to grab another cylinder here. I'm going to create it. Okay. Drop it down. I'm going to move this piece over here. I'm going to get it lined up into about the middle, let's say, about there. Okay, I'm going to make it a little bit thicker. Okay, it's about there in the center. I'm going to duplicate that piece, pull this one down. I'm going to scale this one down from the middle as well, get a little bit smaller. I'm going to line it up to about there, let's say. Okay, I'm going to duplicate that guy, bring him over, get him lined up with this one right here, and I might go ahead and have one here. I'm going to duplicate it and put another guy right about there. Okay, I'm going to see if I can't raise him up a little bit more. Pull this guy back a teeny bit. Maybe pull him back a little. You know what? Maybe I might just have one instead of having the both of them like that. Okay? So I get those in position. They look about right. I'm going to go ahead and save myself time. I'm going to combine these three objects by selecting them, coming down to combine. Center the pivot, select the object I'm going to do the boolean on. Go to mesh, boolean, difference. Now I have this cool little piece here. Now it's a little thick, but look at how cool. I can just scale it down and make it nice and thin. And it looks like a nice little support piece I can have, okay, to use. So to go ahead and finish that off, I'm going to go ahead and round this up like this. Put it to a 90 degree. Take it. I'm going to duplicate that piece. Put it over right here. I'm going to take that little squash piece that I saved, and I'm going to use that as the top platform piece. I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to widen it out really quick. Okay. I'm going to drop it down on top of itself. And just to make sure it's on there, there's a little bit more of an overhang on this side, so I'm just going to manually come in here and grab the vertices and just sort of eyeball it. And I can just tell by looking at it. If I bring it back to about there, I'm about the same distance, right? Same thing with the front. I can grab this and I can bring this in here like so. Okay. Now, just to make this look a little bit cooler, what I might do is scale it up a little bit. I'm going to select my edges on here like so, and I'm going to bevel them. Remember that I showed you that last week. If I come down here under Edit Mesh and go down to Bevel, I have to hit the option box to see what the segments are set at. I'm going to go ahead and set this at 2 or 3. 2 is fine. I have the width there. I'm going to hit Apply. Now I didn't really notice much of a change there, so I'm going to Command Z it, come back, expand open the width, and then hit Apply again. I'm going to do that a little bit more width in there, hit Apply, and cool. Now if I close it, I have this nice little detailed piece right there with a support on it that I can use for part of my engine. Okay, so I'm going to select this right now. I'm going to group this into one piece, and I'm going to come back into my outliner here, and I'm going to call this my platform. Okay, so let me think of a couple other quick shapes that I could possibly use that I can make quickly. So I'm thinking of a canister shape that might have some type of round dome on it that looks like it could hold fuel or something, right? So one thing that I could do is I can come in here and I could take a really basic, real simple cylinder. I can come back in here and I could take a real basic sphere, zoom in on my sphere right here. I'm going to go ahead and add just a couple more subdivisions in there so it's nice and smooth. I'm going to come in here, select faces. I'm going to delete the faces that I don't need. Okay, I'm going to take this object right here, center the pivot. I'm going to move it over. I'm going to put that up on the top right here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in on my object. If I want to get it right on, what can I do? I can go to the top view really quick, hit my perspective option, go to top, hit F. It frames me in on my object. I can center my object right about dead center. Okay, about right there. Then once I have it there, I can scale it up really quickly. Okay, I can get it to where that looks pretty good right there. Maybe move it over just a teeny bit more to right there. I'm going to go back to my perspective view now. And then what I can do is I can scale it up a little bit more. I can grab it and pull it up like that. Now it looks like I have some like cool little canister piece, right, that a hose could connect to or something. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to duplicate that, group it. I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to label that as canister. Now real quick, what I'm going to do, what's one thing Phil hasn't done yet that I should be doing? I haven't saved. File. Save scene as. I'm going to come back down in here. I'm going to pick my desktop location. I'm going to call this Rocket Parts. I cannot type with this new keyboard here. I'm not used to it. Rosker Parts. There we go. So I have rocket parts. In fact, you know how I like to save in steps. I'm going to call it O1. I'm going to hit Save As. Okay. I'm trying to think if there might be one or two more parts that I might use. I might just make, there's some other cool shapes that I can make really simply. Like I'm going to take this shape right here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to grab these vertices. I'm going to drop them down and create that sort of edge piece right there. So it looks like it's, you know, some neat little piece here. And then I could always extrude a shape out of that. Watch, I can take, actually I was going to do that with this. Let me, yeah, I'm going to grab this piece right here. Okay, it's grouped together. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to bring this over here. Okay, I'm going to raise this up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and scale this down, even though it might be a little, the typology might be a little heavy on it. That's okay. For right now, you guys are just learning. I'm going to save myself some time here, and I'm going to create another cool little shape that might be attached to this piece right here. So I'm going to do that. And now what I'm going to do, I could grab the vertices of this and pull it all the way down, or I can come in here, which I'm thinking I'm going to do, go to Independent Selection, touch the top of the sphere, go to See-Through mode, go to Vertices, try it again, click Vertices there, select these vertices, and I'm just going to grab them and bring them all the way down like this. Okay? And I'm going to bring them down about there. I'm going to go ahead and touch this piece now. I'm going to scale them up a little bit, put a little bit of what that trim detail that I call on it, have them up there. I'm going to duplicate that, bring that down to the base here. I'm going to go ahead, go into vertice mode on that, grab these vertices, pull them up a little bit just to have it look a little different, let's say. Okay, now I have this cool piece right here that looks like it's some type of mounting tube or something for my engine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group this. I'll label it later. It's grouped now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, back to this piece. I want to smooth that right now. So I'm going to come in here to my edge. I'm going to select all the edges. Okay, I'm going to go back under Edit Mesh, go to Bevel, hit the option box, hit Apply. Now I have a nice little smooth edge on that. Okay, hit Close. Let's take a look at it. Looks pretty cool. I'm going to grab that, bring it in here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a extrusion from the outside here. I'm going to select that surface, and I'm going to scale it within inside itself and make a little piece that connects to my little piece here. Okay, so I'm going to come down under Edit Mesh, Extrude. I'm going to scale it down like so, scale it inside itself like that, come down to Mesh again, Extrude, and then pull it out, and then just stick that piece inside that little piece right there. Okay? Now, since I did that, I'm looking, and you know what, it'd be cool if it fit right between the middle of those supports too. So what I can do is go to Vertices real quick, go to my See-Through mode. I can grab the vertices there, grab the vertices here, and I could scale them inwards like this and get that to fit exactly where I want it to be. That just looks like it could be some cool little engine part that I might use. Okay, I'm going to select all of them together. I'm going to hit Control G for group, and I'm going to call this side engine piece. And later on, if I end up keeping that piece, I can come back into it and relabel it. Okay, so here. So right now, I'm going to take a quick break here. And these are some core pieces I can use to start modeling parts of my rocket engine. Okay.